I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Today we're raising a compass, looking across a dusty dungeon map, and journeying through expansive, moderately themed temples, as I rank the dungeons of The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. Perhaps the most important 3D adventure game to exist, Ocarina of Time would be nothing without the enormous scope and scale of its dungeon design. These are the main locations you look forward to exploring in Zelda, each with their own unique themes and puzzles to solve. Some, of course, are better than others, which is why I have no choice but to rank them according to my own personal tastes and biases. To be eligible for this list, the dungeon must have an official dungeon boss at the end, meaning the Ice Cavern, Bottom of the Well, and the Gerudo Training Ground are all ineligible. But if I were to rank them, Gerudo Training Ground sits at the bottom because I don't really like the gimmick of collecting keys for a central treasure room. Bottom of the Well comes second because while I enjoy the unsettling atmosphere, I think the mini-dungeon doesn't utilize its space well for its mandatory segments. Ice Cavern takes first place because despite a few annoying block-pushing puzzles, I like the room with the spinning blades and silver rupees, and it feels the most like a traditional dungeon. Also, I won't be talking about the main dungeon bosses in this video. If you're interested in their ranking, check the first video link in the description. Now then, all 9 dungeons in Ocarina of Time, ranked. Let me know your favourite down below. At number 9, we have Inside Jabu Jabu's Belly, the 3rd dungeon of the game. Found in Zora's domain, you have to enter the Great Fish to retrieve the Zora's Sapphire and save Princess Ruto. But that's where I feel the dungeon is at its weakest. For certain portions, you have to carry around the dead weight that is Ruto, using her to hold down switches, protecting her from enemies, ensuring she doesn't fall down deadly sinkholes, etc, etc. If you know where you're going, it's not terribly difficult, but as someone who hasn't played Ocarina of Time in around 6 or 7 years, I completely forgot this dungeon's progression, and found myself going around in circles for a good 15 minutes trying to figure out where to bring the princess, only to realize I'd been going the wrong way the whole time. Beyond that, I'm just not personally a big fan of the biological nature of the dungeon. Exploring the insides of a gigantic fish just feels a bit gross to me, even if we get one of the better Zelda series items, the boomerang. Some of the rooms are fun, like fighting the giant creepy tendrils that appear in the ceilings of certain areas, and the boss fight against the Big Octo is a fun enough challenge, reminiscent of the cue ball mini-boss from Link's Awakening. I'm also not the biggest fan of the overall enemies. The stingers were frustrating to fight due to their tendency to fly out of your reach, or stay under the ground while you're waiting for them to rise so you can shoot them, while most other enemies are electrified until you obtain the boomerang, making battles very risky as you'll just get electrocuted, which is never a fun thing in a Nintendo 64 game. I can tell a lot of thought went into this dungeon's overall design and layout, as all the dungeons in this game had this, but it's just a bit too off-putting from my tastes for a design perspective. I'd rather explore ancient ruins and broken caverns than the insides of any creature, and that's okay. At number 8, we have Ganon's Castle, the final dungeon of the game, which requires players to destroy 6 seals, 1 per sage, to open the path to Ganondorf himself. Each seal is guarded by a corridor that is themed around that given sage's power, so Ruto's water path has you dealing with ice physics, while Darunia's fire path has you collecting silver rupees over a room filled with boiling lava. The hover boots were a godsend for this dungeon, as many of the rooms had bottomless pits or dangerous challenges where having that extra time in the sky was a blessing. I'll admit, I fully got stuck in the spirit room, as I had no idea what I was supposed to do to solve this puzzle. I tried shooting the ceiling with arrows, hook-shotting it, thinking it was glass. Turns out though, it was spiderwebs, and I had to use a fire arrow to burn the blockage, allowing me to use the mirror shield to open the way. I'm sure this was way easier to read on the 3DS version, as I don't remember having the same issue there. I think this is just a case of N64 textures, you sneaky bastards. I really liked the shadow path, as you had to utilize the lens of truth to reveal hidden platforms and pathways to reach various buttons to progress to the end of the room. Solid platforming, not a lot of danger beyond your own skill, and you get those fancy new gauntlets which lets you go outside the dungeon over to the fairy fountain to get a nice buff. The forest path had a fun wind-based room that involved being blown along fans, the only real dud of this dungeon being the light path, which didn't have a theme as Rauru never had his own dungeon. Then there's the final climb to Ganondorf, taking on tough opponents before making your way back down the tower with a time limit, as you rush to escape the collapsing ruins with Princess Zelda. My issue with dungeons like this is that it doesn't really have an original gimmick of its own, instead using the rest of the game in a recap clip show fashion to create its obstacles. Which is fine, I enjoy that trope, but I put a lot more stock on the dungeons that originated those trials in the first place, and that's why his tower is so low on this list. At number 7, we have Dodongo's Cavern, the second dungeon of the game, and the white bread of Ocarina of Time. Because there's nothing inherently wrong with this dungeon or its level design, but there's just absolutely nothing that makes it stand out on its own merits. You have a large central room which contains the path leading to the boss, only to access it you have to explore the entire left and right portion of the dungeon, across 2 different floors to solve a myriad of puzzles. Your goal is to collect the bomb bag, allowing you to carry bombs, which you then need to drop into the eyes of the giant Dodongo skull in the central area. But there are corridors of small Dodongos, puzzle rooms with blades and hidden eye targets you gotta hit with your slingshot, and multiple encounters with this dungeon's mini-bosses, the Lizalfos. These lizard folk are surprisingly agile, able to jump back from Link's attacks and counter effectively. It doesn't help that they're fought on very small platforms over lava. I found the jump attack to help immensely, but overall, a very solid mini-boss with great execution. There are a few fun bomb puzzles, including this room where you get to blow up a central pillar to release a staircase, which is a lot of fun. But honestly, the puzzles don't get more expansive than that. Well, there is a block-pushing puzzle near the boss fight, but almost every dungeon in this game has some form of block-pushing, so it's not the most exciting prospect in the world. Another reason for this cavern's low placement, and this is just me, but I hate when the game asks you to return to a dungeon you've cleared out later in the game for collectibles. For example, this dungeon houses one of the hidden Scarecrow's song locations, as you'll need to summon Pierre and hookshot up to him to claim the prize. Yes, this dungeon is on the way to Goron City for the Fire Temple questline, but who would ever think to come back here, let alone go to this spot so Navi can flash a different color to signify playing the Scarecrow song? It's just not my cup of tea, as I would never think to return to somewhere I've already conquered, and this is the most blatant example in this game I could recall. At number 6, we have Inside the Deku Tree, the first dungeon of the game. Unlike most of the 3D Zeldas, you're thrust into your first dungeon experience pretty much immediately, as the Great Deku Tree informs you that he is slowly dying and it's up to Link and Navi to cleanse his roots. More puzzle than combat focused, you have to explore up the central trunk, going through each floor fully as you go, collecting the slingshot pretty quickly into your adventure. It's a lot of shooting skull wall chillers to knock them off vines, climbing, doing a few platforming puzzles to get used to the controls. There's a Deku Scrub that teaches you to shield against certain enemies, and giant skull chillers at the top layer that teach you patience as you wait for them to reveal their weak point. The main fun of the dungeon though is in the roots, as you hop from the top level, break open a spider web in the central chamber, and fall into a vast pool. The goal is to reach this room's highest platform, but to do this, you have to loop around through a series of side paths, including one that has you avoiding a giant spinning blade, one that has you fighting against a series of baby Goma, and many puzzles throughout the dungeon that involve you lighting Deku sticks with torches to burn away obstacles or light other sconces in the dungeon. Then there's the little puzzle to access the boss room, 3 Deku Scrubs that can only be defeated in a certain order. You'll learn the solution from an earlier Deku Scrub encounter, and if you defeat the trio correctly, you'll be able to access the dungeon boss. Different to every other temple in the game, but I honestly don't hate the idea of not needing a boss key every now and then. This dungeon is perfect at teaching you the ropes, it's never too hard nor too complex, and eases the player into the world masterfully. Now if only there wasn't a gold skulltula you can only get by bombing a wall with the Dodongo's Cavern bomb bag, only to realise the skulltula is out of reach and you can't claim the token without the Jabu Jabu's belly boomerang. But at least this is telling me to come back here as a child, like the game saying, have this final prize for beating the child dungeons. It's not required for me to come back here as an adult, unlike Dodongo's Cavern, thank God. Hey all, sorry to be a bother, but I'm trying to reach 35,000 subscribers by October of 2024. If, after finishing this video, you like what you see, consider parrying that subscribe button to stay up to date on all my future videos. Back to the regularly scheduled programming. At number 5, we have the Fire Temple, the 5th dungeon of the game, found within the Death Mountain crater. I really had to debate on the order of the 5 main temples because I honestly think they all represent the strengths of dungeon-based Zelda games perfectly. But of the bunch, I find the Fire Temple to be the least interesting. The goal is to save all the Goron prisoners, which will eventually lead you to the boss key so you can follow Darunia into Volvagia's chamber. So you'll be doing a lot of climbing up, exploring large-scale rooms filled with lava, rolling boulders, and deadly firewalls, all the while looking for this dungeon's item, the Megaton Hammer. Immediately, there's one aspect of this dungeon I despise, and that is how long it takes you to climb to the upper floors. You're going up railings, solving block puzzles, and if you, for example, just a hypothetical, fall down the hole in this upper room, you have to do it all over again. It's a good 5-minute detour, and look, I'm no speedrunner, but even I have my limits. At least with the Water Temple, it's more puzzle-focused, so I know my routes. Here in the Fire Temple, it's just one room that the developers knew people would fall down that serves no purpose other than to pad the runtime. On the flip side, I really like the various fire-based obstacles. The room with the walls that flare up as you get close creates a cool maze, which when combined with rolling boulders and flamethrowers, makes for some tense moments. There's the room where after you enter, you're chased by a wall of fire and you have to outrun it multiple times to progress through the dungeon. Or the run-up to get the Megaton Hammer, which requires perfect reflexes. I struggled on this as a kid, but mastered it easily this time around. And then the dungeon mini-bosses, the Flare Dancers, are a really fun set of encounters, as you douse their flames and attack them as they flee. Very cinematic and very fitting. I'm also a sucker for the "you've explored the dungeon, but the boss key was actually right by the start all along" trope, as it's in the path behind the statue in the entrance hall that takes you to your prize. Aside from another awkward Scarecrow song location that I'd never have predicted had I not been using a guide for the gold skulltulas, this dungeon does have a lot going for it, but its ability to be so tedious the moment you screw up or fall down a floor is more than enough for me to dock it to 5th place. That being said, I do think the Fire Temple is big inspiration for many locations that we've seen in other video games recently. For example, Dark Souls 2's Broom Tower feels very much inspired by Zelda Ocarina of Time, and the Fire Temple specifically. If you know, you know. At number 4, we have the Spirit Temple, the 8th dungeon of the game, found deep in the sands of the Desert Colossus. A fan favourite, I can totally see why. After all, this is the only temple that requires you to take it on as both Adult Link and Child Link. And if we're including the dungeon boss as part of the package, Twin Rover is an absolute blast. The puzzles for the first half of the dungeon focus on Child Link, using his limited moveset, such as his boomerang and his bombs, to make as much progress as he can on the left side of the dungeon. This is for Naboru, who wants the treasure hidden inside the temple, and you're just unlucky enough to be nearby at the time. You actually end up facing Lizalfos and Stalfos as regular enemies, with the latter being interesting as you've only ever fought them as Adult Link up to this point, so using the Deku Nuts to stun the skeleton to do damage was the tactic I adopted to survive. There was only one moment that actually annoyed me in the Child Link portion, and that was throwing this boomerang to hit this crystal to drop a bridge. Compared to the rest of the puzzles, this felt so unintuitive and it made no sense to me. But I digress. Eventually you face off against an Iron Knuckle, and doing this as Kid Link was terrifying. I got greedy with a lot of my attacks, and the Iron Knuckle does a crazy amount of damage. Luckily the pillars in the room can be destroyed for hearts, this room really giving Ornstein and Smoties, not gonna lie. Then you can head back to the adult era with your new fancy gauntlets that'll let you access the rest of the dungeon. From there, the goal is to find the Mirror Shield, which will allow you to solve a series of light puzzles to open the way to the boss, plus another Iron Knuckle fight with Naboru for good measure. Screw this room with the moving wall though, I kept messing up so close to the top. Funnily enough though, we actually had this exact obstacle format in an old Minecraft game show I have on my channel, link in the description, so the concept was actually pretty sound, the execution here just left a lot to be desired. I think had we spent more time with the Mirror Shield and had an extra puzzle or two to flesh out its mechanics further, I would be willing to put the Spirit Temple in my top 3, but honestly, it feels like the adult portion goes by way faster than the kid portion, leading to this weird Mandela effect that the temple isn't as long as it actually is. I think it would have been really cool if for the Mirror Shield we got puzzles that actually incorporate sucking in fire or ice, similar to the Twin Rover boss fight, but within the dungeon as a puzzle. I just think that would be really cool. Music is god tier though. At number 3, we have the Water Temple, the 6th dungeon in the game, and easily the most controversial all these years later. I still remember the early era of YouTube where I felt I was gaslighted into considering the Water Temple the worst dungeon in Zelda history, when, I'm just gonna say it, it is nowhere near the bottom half. The main issue with the temple that people had was that it was hard to navigate, as you'd have to constantly raise and lower the water level to reach different rooms. And if you reached a door out of order and didn't have a key, well, fuck my drag, right? And I will say, during this playthrough, I had a few moments like that. I explored down the wrong tunnel, ended up somewhere I didn't need to be right away, but I wasn't annoyed. I relished the challenge to try and find that missing key, figure out this puzzle box, and keep progressing. The other issue was that in the N64 version, you had to keep entering your inventory to put on and take off the iron boots, to either sink or float in the water, and this was annoying. But the 3DS remake of Ocarina of Time completely fixed this issue, as well as giving players more visual indicators for the locations where you raise and lower the water level, and how each spot affects the dungeon. It's not the variant I played, as I have no way to capture a 3DS footage, but I do own the 3DS edition of this game and have played it multiple times. Thank you, my best friend Nathan, for letting me borrow your copy for the last 8 years. So I've experienced this temple with the changes, and it is definitely much better for them. So many unique rooms, such as the hookshot up the waterfall room, or the swimming down a river avoiding whirlpools room, or one of the most iconic mini-bosses in gaming history, Dark Link, in that illusory room with a single lone tree at its center. Now, I'll admit, I think the actual fight is a mess, and I don't understand the strategy behind beating Dark Link at all, to the point where I dins-fired my way through it for my own sanity, but the concept is lit. At the end of the day, the Water Temple was difficult for most people because they played it when they were kids or teens when the game first came out. In my 20s, I really didn't struggle, and I think with a fresh lens, we'll all realize that while it's not the best dungeon in the game, it's a fun experience and is shockingly well designed. Except this one room where I pushed the sliding block in the wrong direction because I'm dumb. Fuck that room. At number 2, we have the Shadow Temple, the 7th dungeon in the game, and let me just ask, Nintendo, are you okay? The Shadow Temple is one of the darkest locations in the series, this hidden nook at the back of the Kakariko graveyard that houses one of the most disturbing areas in all of Zelda. The temple itself is quite a linear experience, asking the player to complete various rooms in a linear fashion to make it to the lower floors. You'll always be progressing in one direction, which gives it an entirely different feel to the rest of the dungeon roster. You're always descending, floor after floor, almost like you're going down into the pits of hell itself. Complete with a lovely boat ride across the theoretical river Styx on the lowest floor. Don't you just love the happy-go-lucky nature of Zelda? There are various blade traps, torture devices, blood littering the halls, hidden rooms that require the lens of truth to bypass, and catacombs with skulls galore to explore. The mini-boss is a rematch against Deadhand, whom we knew from the bottom of the well, and while he's obviously much easier to fight as an adult, he's still terrifying. Being gripped as this creature shambles its weight towards you is without a doubt one of those moments that just sticks with you. You're ducking through spike traps, using your newly acquired hover boots to cross dangerous gaps, avoiding guillotines, all the while the creepiest dungeon music is playing in the background. Some rooms also have Redeads and Gibdos, whom are some of the most famous enemies from Ocarina of Time due to their haunting screeches and ability to hug you. Affection can kill, kids. This is one of those dungeons that might not fully stick with you as a child, but the moment you play it as a fully functioning adult, you start wondering how the fuck Nintendo got away with putting this in their kids game. Because the way they pushed the envelope to its limit was genius. Atmosphere for days, and also one of the weirdest concepts for a boss fight at the bottom. But at the end of the day, it was always destined to land in second place because, come on, it's against the goddamn goat. At number 1, we have the Forest Temple, the 4th dungeon in the game and the first temple Link faces as an adult. When you think about how the previous dungeon was Jabu Jabu, it hits you in the face how much of an upgrade the Forest Temple is by comparison. I mean, I put Jabu Jabu as my least favorite dungeon, and the Forest Temple is my favorite, so that really says it all, doesn't it? This temple is fascinating, because unlike the others, it's less of a temple and more of a hidden woodland mansion. It's furnished with carpentry, draped with curtains, and the boss arena has a host of lovely paintings to admire. The way the complex winds around on itself, connected to various courtyards outside as you progress, is just really cool. This dungeon has the ability to have the player naturally explore every nook and cranny, with every room feeling relevant to progression, which isn't always the case in some dungeons. You're having to deal with twisting corridors, a deeply unsettling chess room with a falling ceiling, multiple rooms where you have to face off against the mini-bosses of the dungeon, Stalfos Knights, who are brutal, by the way. And all that on top of needing to find all 4 Poe sisters in order to activate the elevator leading to the Phantom Ganon boss fight. The Poes aren't hard fights on their own, but the concept of needing to scour the dungeon to bring the spirits back to their torches is a really fun gimmick. The first 2 also utilize the newly acquired bow really nicely, which is easily the most important dungeon item in the game. Your bow is your lifeline in almost every Zelda game, Ocarina of Time included, and though it functions as a stronger slingshot, it's vital for adult Link to progress. We're also introduced to Wall Masters for the first time. In some rooms, if you're grabbed by a lurking shadow, you'll be snatched and sent back to the entrance. It's a shame then that Navi always gives you a warning in this temple, taking away any sense of shock, surprise, or ambush. All of this set to one of the most haunting, isolating, and iconic soundtracks in gaming history. The best way to describe it, it captures the feeling of exploring something that's just uncanny enough to feel familiar, but not enough to feel comfortable. Why Saria wanted to set up shop here, I don't know, but by God, she could use an interior decorator. Some lights, maybe hire the Ghostbusters, take out the room with the dangerous spinning plinth, make it into a nice guest room. I also just have a personal connection to the Forest Temple because almost a decade ago, I was part of a large Minecraft parkour server and I made a fully working parkour course that took you all through the Forest Temple. Was it great? Probably not. I wish I had footage of it, to be honest. But it showed I had that connection, you know? I wasn't willing to make the water temple in Minecraft, let's just say that. Overall, it's a safe pick, but it's my choice. And the Forest Temple earns my number 1 spot as my favorite dungeon in Ocarina of Time. And that's my list. Which dungeon is your favorite from Ocarina of Time? Sound off in the comments below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of my future videos as they come out. My social medias are on screen now. Feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter, my Blue Sky, or my Discord. My Twitter is definitely the best place to follow, though, out of all three of those. Trust me on that one. A massive shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. You guys are amazing. It only costs $4.99, and you get early access to my Tuesday videos, plus a shout out at the end of this video and in the descriptions. Very cool. And a massive shout out to my patrons over on Patreon as well. I'm planning on phasing Patreon out as a platform at the end of June, so these will be the last few months that I shout you guys out, but thank you so much for the support over the years, both from my old channel and to this new one. You guys are iconic. I'll see you guys next time for another video. Adios!